just ask if you can remember what it felt like when you left home and you were striking out on your own. What did that feel like? Was it exciting, scary, didn't want to go? Maybe left home a few times? Does anyone have really clear memories of that time or what that felt like? Grandpa's nodding his head.
Lots of memories of that.
Mostly exciting? Or?
It was both. It was both. I knew I wasn't going to be home for 2 years. And you know, in those days you didn't even make phone calls. And letters were slow. And I knew I was going to be away from home for 2 solid years without any contact with family. And it was hard. But at the same time it was exciting because I knew I was beginning. I went to, you know, to Ohio to school at that time. And so I knew it was going to be an exciting time. But there was also, I mean, I can still remember very, very clearly, if someone had given me a bicycle even, I would have pedaled all 2,000 miles home. Very, you know, and been glad to do it. But, you know, I didn't. But I mean, I would have walked. You know, I was, and big part of it was knowing that I was not going to see any of my family for 2 solid years, you know, so, yeah, so it was both. So I know what, you know, I mean, it was painful and at the same time offering a whole lot of new experience, yeah.
Well, it's interesting because Jacob, in this part of his life, he is setting out from home for the first time. So he has a lot of anxiety about it, but also added to his story, which of course is not a part of Grandpa's story, is that he's on the run. He's going, not because he's going to school or he has this new thing in front of him. He's leaving because of the way he acted with his brother Esau. So if you remember the story, Jacob was a twin with Esau, who was the elder. And at one point, Jacob is cooking dinner. He's making a stew. His brother Esau comes in. He says, "I'm famished. Give me some of that stew." And Jacob says, "Well, if you give me your birthright, I'll give you some stew." Now, you know, this is one of those times where you think, this is quite a story here, and it's surprising that Esau does it. He says, "Well, I'm going to die anyway." He's very dramatic, you know. "I'll just give it to you. I'd rather have this stew." So that's the first part, and then Esau is pretty reserved. And the second part, and his mother helped him with this one, he steals the older son's blessing. He dresses up like Esau, smells like Esau, the whole deal. His father, Isaac, is too old to see clearly. And so he passes on this blessing to Jacob. So he takes all of this from Esau, who was older. And Esau, it says in the Bible, it says he wanted to kill him. So his mother sends Jacob on his way to an uncle's house. So he has to leave home. And this is where we find him in our story when he's traveling. And I'm not sure of the distance. I meant to look that up. I'm curious how far he had to travel. But he stops for the night. He takes that rock. And he has this beautiful dream. Now, one of the interesting features to add to this, because I was also curious about how old he was. I have this image in my mind of a younger Jacob, because he hasn't even gotten married yet. Does anyone have any idea how old Jacob is in the story? He's 77. Imagine striking out from home at 77, and your mother had to push you out. So, you know, sort of reframes maybe, you know, children leaving home these days. But I know, isn't that strange? But, you know, and somebody did the math. I have the whole equation here of how we get to that. You know, and somebody said, well, I'll try to make this simple. Isaac was 40 when he married Rebekah. He was 60 when he had Jacob and Esau. He was 180 when he died. So Jacob would have been 120 when Isaac died. Then he starts going through the different verses that mention some period of time, and as we continue to subtract the years, what we end with is 77. So he's 77. Now, of course, the thing that really, I think adds to that is that we know 77. I mean, just that number tells you there's something significant about this. To have those sevens, which are a complete kind of number. So it's 77. But we'll forget his age for a minute, and we'll come back to our story. So he has this beautiful dream. He has this beautiful dream of the stairway, and the angels are traveling up and down on the stairway, and God is there. And then he wakes up, and he builds an altar. It's the first altar he makes, and he continues on his way. Now, I imagine dreams are pretty much open to interpretation anyway. We kind of look for symbolism in dreams quite easily. So there have been numerous interpretations of this passage through the years, and numerous ways of trying to understand, what did this mean? Jacob's ladder, what was this about, this stairway to heaven? And so I wanted just to share just a few of the interpretations through the years that have, what people have thought might be the meaning of this beautiful dream. So this is a Jewish interpretation, that think of this stairway, think of this ladder, that human beings are the ladder. In other words, we have our feet planted on earth, and we kind of go about our daily business, but our mind, our emotional and intellectual capabilities can be connected to the spiritual world. So that's the idea that we could be the ladder. Another one is that this is a ladder of prayer, that the ascending and descending is like what it's like when we're praying, or that we are kind of raising our minds and our thoughts to God. Now, some of the early church fathers said that what this symbolized was that this is a journey we make during our life. If we increase in virtue and kind of perfect ourselves, we make this journey. But also this is the journey the soul travels after death, this kind of communication. Now the other one is that it is the ladder being connecting piece between heaven and earth, is that it symbolized a reunion of heaven and earth. And that this is what Jesus brought about in his life and death and resurrection. So it's about this reunion of heaven and earth. Well, where our tradition adds to the conversation, and I'm sure, that is clearly not all the ways people have thought about this story, but where our tradition adds, or what we can see it as, this comes out a lot in Anita Dole's commentary. She said that the Word is a ladder. In other words, the Word is this connecting piece between earth and heaven, and a way to connect with the Lord and feel the Lord's presence, which is a very beautiful way of seeing it. And when I was reading Emanuel Swedenborg's commentary this week, what he largely spoke of it as is basically when we think of a ladder or a stairway, it has steps. And this is a symbol or a sign, and can be, just a way to look at it, of our growth process. That we are traveling by stages, by steps, as we grow spiritually. And so one thing that he mentions is important. We always like the details. Do you remember, were the angels descending and ascending, or were they ascending and descending? Does anyone remember?
Ascending.
Right. So they're traveling up, and then they're traveling down. Now, this is just one way of looking at it. Our church teachings offer that this points to the fact that things are a little bit out of order for us. If we thought about how the world or the universe really works, we would think of it as the Lord's love and that wisdom and that great energy is focused on all of creation and helps creation to continue to live and breathe, and it comes from God. God is the source. So it should be, if you think about it that way, if you thought about the angels that way, it should be descending, and then if our faith life and we sort of rise in our thoughts, that kind of returns to God as kind of a circle of spiritual growth, a circle of regeneration. That love and that wisdom comes down, and as we try to use it and use it in our lives and understand it, it kind of comes full circle. So the fact that the angels have to travel upward is significant of a fact. And it came out in Sunday school this morning. We kind of have to start at the bottom. I think you said that, Margaret. We kind of have to start at the bottom. And as beautiful as children are, they kind of give us this great big hint when we're taking care of them that, for instance, sharing just does not come naturally. And the children are not born thinking, what are your needs today? What can I get you? And then I'll see to what I need. You know, we know it's completely it comes out sometimes, but it's definitely not the way they are all of the time. And I know several of us have been watching the conventions these last few weeks, and that's all I'm going to say about that. But what I wanted to say was that listening to Michelle Obama, I'm not sure how many of you heard her speech, but she said, you know, the children are children, and even they, you know, when we're all at the dinner table, the president is the last one to be asked how his day was. She said that of her own children. So even children whose dad is the president of the United States still tend to think of their own lives first. You know, it's just such a realistic thing. So what we find is that what we're hoping this whole life is about is growing that new heart and new mind within. And that as we do this and we begin to think more about others, and it doesn't come last to think of what others need, we're starting up those steps. And if we can think, you know, in Emmanuel Swedenborg's writings, he speaks about this process of growing, the different things we'll find. He says as we're growing, we find, first of all, that we are trying to get beyond the external. It's easy at first to judge by appearances, but we begin to see that what's more important is what's inside, and inside a person. And so we're starting to look for that good. And he says, you know, and sometimes during the journey, and this is important to do, but he says we might be giving to charity, but maybe not for the right reasons. Like we might be thinking, this is the thing to do. I should give here and here and here because this will get me to heaven. So the motivations, we're working on it, but the most loving motivation isn't always yet there. And then finally we come to a place where what we really want to do, we want to support people in their physical journey. We want, if those don't, you know, there are so many who have needs, we can give. But what we also want to support others is not just a physical part, but their spiritual part. And he says when he or she is still further perfected, he or she takes care to do good to those who are in good. So we're getting to the top of the ladder. He or she takes care to do good to those who are in good. So I had to think about this because, you know, for a minute I want to say, well, what about those who don't have, you know, but that's not what it's about. Because think about what's the alternative? To do good, we still want to do good to those, but to do good to those who are in good. You don't want to honor that which isn't good. And so what I'm thinking here is maybe a good way of saying this, and I welcome anybody's interpretation of this, but maybe a good way of thinking about this is how do we honor what's best in each other? And how do you lift up the goodness that you see in one another? And how do we honor the spiritual lives of those around us? How do we care for that part of our family, our friends, our neighbors, our communities, our world? How do we actually lift up that spiritual goodness that we see, that we know is from God? How do we support that? And I think that is a very good question to keep with us. You know, I was thinking in my house, you know, it's, you know, how always like getting a cup of coffee for Adam is always a nice thing to do. Coffee is always really good. But, you know, like thinking beyond the physical wants, how do we really lift up people, the spiritual good we see in them? I was at Dillon Nature Center this week. I took the kids, we were all by ourselves, and then this couple came, this wonderful couple. They have 2 little children. They were 3 and they were 1, and she was expecting another one next month. And so I said, "You must have a lot of energy." And she said, "I don't know. I don't think I have as much as I need." And we had this really nice conversation about pregnancy and parenting. But I realized as we were talking, I'm not really lifting up. I mean, she's about to have this new little life come into her life and their household. And she doesn't need me going on about, "Wow, I was really tired too." And, you know, although it's good to connect with people and their experiences, how do we actually lift people up? And how often do we remember to do that? So that was my thought. How do we, and my question, how do we take care to do good to those who are in good? Now, when Jacob awoke, he said he was fearful. You know, I think that language in Scripture, whenever we hear that, sleeping often signifies kind of a time of obscurity or darkness. It was dark, he was sleeping. But we think of enlightenment, woke up. I got it, you know. He wakes up, and it's kind of this symbol that this transition has happened in his life. And he makes that altar. And it says he was scared. And our church teachings offer us this idea. There is a holy fear, and there's a not so holy fear. We can be afraid that in a good way, in the sense we don't want to hurt anybody, we don't want to hurt God, we're afraid that things we've done might have hurt God or somebody. That's a holy fear, and that's good. And then we can have fear of things that aren't sacred. To have that holy fear says it's a sign of a sacred transition has happened here, a sacred alteration. And so he has this new kind of knowledge that comes into his life. And he's going to love it. And he builds that altar and he pours the oil on it. Oil has long been a symbol of love. And so it's another story of, hopefully, gaining in knowledge, gaining in wisdom, and then loving that understanding. So it doesn't just stay in our minds or in the memories, but loving it and putting it to use. You know, it was another beautiful story, like this morning in Sunday school, the water pots, the miracle at Cana. The Lord said, "Fill them up and draw them out. Fill up the wisdom, gain that, and then draw it out. Work on using it and sharing it with others in your life." So that is our task for the week. If you can think of it, how do we take care to do good to those who are in good?